he continued, watching Miss Cornelia's face as the full force of his words sank into her mind. "I want to know more about it." He stopped. His right hand moved idly over the edge of the table, halted beside an ashtray, closed upon something. Miss Cornelia rose. "Is that true, Dale?" she said sorrowfully. Dale nodded. "Yes." She could not trust herself to explain at greater length. Then Miss Cornelia made one of the most magnificent gestures of her life. "Well, even if it is, what has that got to do with it?" she said, turning upon Anderson fiercely, all her protective instinct for those whom she loved aroused. Anderson seemed somewhat impressed by the fierceness of her query. When he went on, it was with less harshness in his manner. "I'm not accusing this girl," he said more gently, "but behind every crime there is a motive. When we've found the motive for this crime, we'll have found the criminal." Unobserved, Dale's hand instinctively went to her bosom. There it lay, the motive, the precious fragment of blueprint which he had torn from Fleming's grasp but an instant before he was shot down. Once Anderson found it in her possession, the case was closed, the evidence against her overwhelming. She could not destroy it. It was the only clue to the hidden room and the truth that might clear Jack Bailey. But somehow she must hide it, get it out of her hands before Anderson's third-degree methods broke her down or he insisted on a search of her person. Her eyes roved wildly about the room, looking for a hiding place. The rain of Anderson's questions began anew. "What papers did Fleming burn in that grate?" he asked abruptly, turning back to Dale. "Papers?" she faltered. "Papers. The ashes are still there." Miss Cornelia made an unavailing interruption. "Miss Ogden has said he didn't come into this room." The detective smiled. "I hold in my hand proof that he was in this room for some time," he said coldly, displaying the half-burned cigarette he had taken from the ashtray a moment before. His cigarette, with his monogram on it. He put the fragment of tobacco and paper carefully away in an envelope and marched over to the fireplace. There he rummaged among the ashes for a moment, like a dog uncovering a bone. He returned to the center of the room with a fragment of blackened blue paper fluttering between his fingers. "A fragment of what is technically known as a blueprint," he announced. "What were you and Richard Fleming doing with a blueprint?" His eyes bored into Dale's. Dale hesitated, shut her lips. "Now think it over," he warned. "The truth will come out sooner or later. Better be frank now." "If he only knew how I wanted to be, he wouldn't be so cruel," thought Dale wearily. "But I can't." Then her heart gave a throb of relief. Jack had come back into the room. Jack and Billy. Jack would protect her. But even as she thought of this, her heart sank again. Protect her, indeed. Poor Jack. He would find it hard enough to protect himself if once this terrible man with the cold smile and steely eyes started questioning him. She looked up anxiously. Bailey made the report breathlessly. "Nothing in the house, sir." Billy's impassive lips confirmed him. "We go all over house. Nobody." Nobody? Nobody in the house? And yet, the mysterious ringing of the phone. The groans Miss Cornelia had heard. Were old wives' tales and witches' fables true after all? Did a power, merciless, evil, exist outside the barriers of the flesh, blasting that trembling flesh with a cold breath from beyond the portals of the grave? There seemed to be no other explanation. "You men stay here," said the detective. "I want to ask you some questions." He doggedly returned to his third degreeing of Dale. "Now what about this blueprint?" he queried sharply. Dale stiffened in her chair. Her lies had failed. Now she would tell a portion of the truth, as much of it as she could without menacing Jack. "I'll tell you what happened," she began. "I sent for Richard Fleming, and when he came I asked him if he knew where there were any blueprints of the house." The detective pounced eagerly upon her admission. "Why did you want blueprints?" he thundered. "Because." Dale took a long breath. "I believe old Mr. Fleming took the money himself from the Union Bank and hid it here." "Where did you get that idea?" Dale's jaw set. I won't tell you." What had the blueprints to do with it? She could think of no plausible explanation but the true one. "Because I'd heard there was a hidden room in this house." The detective leaned forward intently. "Did you locate that room?" Dale hesitated. "No." "Then why did you burn the blueprints?" Dale's nerve was crumbling, breaking, under the repeated, monotonous impact of his questions. "He burned them!" she cried wildly. "I don't know why." The detective paused an instant, then returned to a previous query. "Then you didn't locate this hidden room?" Dale's lips formed a pale no. "Did he?" went on Anderson inexorably. Dale stared at him dully. The breaking point had come. Another question, another, and she would no longer be able to control herself. She would sob out the truth hysterically. That Brooks, the gardener, was Jack Bailey, the missing cashier. That the scrap of blueprint hidden in the bosom of her dress might unravel the secret of the hidden room. That But just as she felt herself, sucked of strength, beginning to slide toward a black, tingling pit of merciful oblivion, Miss Cornelia provided a diversion. "What's that?" she said in a startled voice. The detective turned away from his quarry for an instant. "What's what?" "I heard something," averred Miss Cornelia, staring toward the French windows. All eyes followed the direction of her stare. There was an instant of silence. Then suddenly, traveling swiftly from right to left across the shades of the French windows, there appeared a glowing circle of brilliant white light. Inside the circle was a black, distorted shadow. A shadow like the shadow of a gigantic black bat. It was there, then a second later it was gone. "Oh my God!" wailed Lizzie from her corner. "It's the Bat! That's his sign!" Jack Bailey made a dash for the terrace door, but Miss Cornelia halted him peremptorily. "Wait, Brooks!" She turned to the detective. "Mr. Anderson, you are familiar with the sign of the Bat. Did it look like that?" The detective seemed both puzzled and disturbed. "Well, it looked like the shadow of a bat. I'll say that for it," he said finally. On the heels of his words, the front doorbell began to ring. All turned in the direction of the hall. "I'll answer that," said Jack Bailey eagerly. Miss Cornelia gave him the key to the front door. "Don't admit anyone till you know who it is," she said. Bailey nodded and disappeared into the hall. The others waited tensely. Miss Cornelia's hand crept toward the revolver lying on the table where Anderson had put it down. There was the click of an opening door, the noise of a little scuffle, then men's voices raised in an angry dispute. "What do I know about a flashlight?" cried an irritated voice. "I haven't got a pocket flash. Take your hands off me." Bailey's voice answered the other voice, grim, threatening. The scuffle resumed. Then Doctor Wells burst suddenly into the room, closely followed by Bailey. The Doctor's tie was askew. He looked ruffled and enraged. Bailey followed him vigilantly, seeming not quite sure whether to allow him to enter or not. "My dear Miss Van Gorder," began the Doctor in tones of high dudgeon, "won't you instruct your servants that even if I do make a late call, I'm not to be received with violence?" "I asked you if you had a pocket flash about you," answered Bailey indignantly. "If you call a question like that violence—" He seemed about to restrain the Doctor by physical force. Miss Cornelia quelled the teapot tempest. "It's all right, Brooks," she said, taking the front door key from his hand and putting it back on the table. She turned to Doctor Wells. "You see, Doctor Wells," she explained, "just a moment before you rang the doorbell, a circle of white light was thrown on those window shades." The Doctor laughed with a certain relief. "Why, that was probably the searchlight from my car," he said. "I noticed as I drove up that it fell directly on that window." His explanation seemed to satisfy all present but Lizzie. She regarded him with a deep suspicion. "He may be a lawyer, a merchant, a doctor," she chanted ominously to herself. Miss Cornelia, too, was not entirely at ease. "In the center of this ring of light," she proceeded, her eyes on the Doctor's calm countenance, "was an almost perfect silhouette of a bat." "A bat?" The Doctor